Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammāṃ Saṅghāṃ Namasāmi. Here we go then with video attempt number 2, and got a bit more light this time. And I've got a friend behind the camera whose job is to smile at me and try and help me relax with this thing. It still seems very unnatural to me sitting here talking into camera. It's not reacting. And again, I've got quite a difficult subject, or it might be difficult for some people, not difficult for me actually. But this evening I thought I'd give a talk dedicated to my father, because it's 29th anniversary of his suicide tomorrow. So I thought I'd talk about that. And the horror of the whole event, it had a very inspiring side to it, which I'll try and explain. And always good to be able to tell a story, to see how the Dhamma, or the knowledge of Dhamma, arises naturally and from experience, rather than being something that's a theory or an idea, or rather to say, power of experience in shifting your mind through Dhamma. And also, experience of your father's death was a big one for everybody. My father committed suicide when I was 36 years old, which was a hugely unexpected event for the family, despite the fact that my father had been quite depressed for some time, having lost his job, being made redundant. None of us realised how depressed he was. And then one day my mother went home from work. She was still a school teacher at the time, to find my father hanging in the hallway. And called my brother, and they were there while the police came and collected the body and everything. At the time I was in London, still studying, and at the time that he died, I was on a tube train, travelling from my girlfriend's place to college. And I sat on the tube train, completely normal day, on my way to the lectures, and sitting still, and all of a sudden I had a very strong, sharp pain in my neck, for absolutely no reason. And I was sitting there as a physiotherapy student, so I was in my final year of physiotherapy, and so this pain that rose in my neck and then completely disappeared was a complete mystery. And there was also the kind of feeling, or the quality of that pain. There was something different about it, and there's just the sudden nature of it. So I decided to stay on the train and go back to the nursing home where I lived, which was a strange decision to make, because the pain had completely gone away. I had no reason not to go to college. But for some reason I decided to stay on the train. I went back to the nursing home and up to my room on the top floor. Well, I just arrived at my room, and the communal telephone rang, which is a telephone which served about 40 rooms on the top floor. It's a payphone. I never used it, and never answered it. There's no reason to answer it. It's always considered to be a wrong number. Why would anybody call a payphone? So the phone was ringing as I walked in the door, and the corridor to the nursing home. And for some reason I decided to pick up the phone again, for no reason I could fathom. And it happened to be my brother on the other end of the phone to tell me what had happened to my father. So That was probably the most surprising event of my life, and I didn't know what to say to my brother because of what had happened on the train. My mind kept going back to what had happened on the train. So I just remember saying to my brother, well, is he dead? And my brother said, yes, he's dead. And I said, okay, so I'll just throw a few things in the bag and I'll be down as soon as I can. So I got a taxi from the reception room at the front of the hospital, made my way back to my mother's place to find my mother and brother in deep shock. And a whole series of events ensued. My father's funeral and everything. But what I want to talk about, or the thing I want to highlight, is how the mysterious nature of the events around his death gave this whole thing a completely different flavour. So all the way through all the events that ensued, then I was always wondering, well, what was that pain on the train? It was, I found out, at exactly the same time that my father had committed suicide. And how did I know what had happened? How did I know to go back to the nursing home? How did I know how to pick up the telephone? So I had nothing happening consciously to tell me to do any of those things. It was just a completely ordinary day. I was just fumbling my way through a completely ordinary day. So the nature of those experiences had opened my mind in some way to something special or out of the ordinary. And I found myself relating to the whole event of my father's death in a different way than I would have expected completely. So I found myself saying to my mother and brother, we must light a candle for my father, which I had no belief that my father was still alive or existing in any way. Although I've been a Buddhist for many years, it's not that I believed in rebirth. I was a meditator and came to Buddhism through psychology, so I had a very rational approach to the whole thing, thought as a kind of therapy. But I found myself saying, we must light a candle for my father, first thing, and then a whole lot of thoughts like that, of things that we must do for my father. Let's do this for my father, let's do that for my father. Let's invite other people to come and light candles for my father. And this held me together and seemed to hold the whole event together, what my mother tells me over the years. Despite the fact that none of us in any way believed in what we were doing would be helping my father in any kind of way of a religious convention, or there are these kind of conventions in Buddhism that you believe that you can do things to dedicate them to your deceased relative. But there was none of that in my mind. I was just acting in a very spontaneous way, all based on this event on the train, which had opened my mind to something more mysterious. Actually, later, quite a long time later, when I got over the events of my father's death, I remembered that a friend of mine had been to a spiritualist church up in the north of England. He went there as a complete cynic, actually, and there was a clairvoyant there, and the clairvoyant went into a trance and then had a message for my friend. And she said to my friend, tell your friend in London to listen to the pain in his neck. This is something I remembered many months later. So I had another event, another thing that I could have wondered about or tried to explain in some kind of psychic terms, like I could try and explain my father's death or events around my father's death as being some kind of karmic connection with my father. Something like that could be a good theory, wouldn't it? I'd heard all kinds of theories about why is it that this clairvoyant in the north of England, did she know something? How did she know that? But actually none of this actually bears on the situation. All that bore on the situation was that event on the train that opened my mind to some other kind of possibility, nothing more than that. So I'm left with an impression then that all we need in a spiritual life is some kind of experience that can open our minds to something, to some other possibility, and then the rest can follow from that. If your mind is open in that kind of way, you can end up relating to a whole series of events, very tragic events, in a completely different way. So I thought that was a story worth telling, and to tell that in memory of my father, being it is his death anniversary tomorrow. I feel a bit more emotional about it than I'd expected to, actually, after all these years, 29 years. But I'm left feeling very proud of my father. My father was an inventor, and he was one of the pioneers of what they call the head-up display in aeroplanes, using fibre optics. And these displays actually have helped me to develop my view of the mind, of a mind that projects information in front of it, and the function of thought and feeling is being information projected by the mind onto phenomena as their natural function. So all these things have been very influential. So I have a great respect and love still for my father and the kind of contribution that he's made in my life. And nowadays I can think of these events and this connection that maybe I had this kind of connection with my father. That was clear. That connection's still there. That memory is still there. Whether we believe in the afterlife or not, then for me to be able to relate to my father's memory is something that helps keep my father's memory alive, and then helps keep something of my father alive in the world, isn't it? Through that, through my memories, then I keep my father alive in the world, his influence on my own life. So this is a way that he's still living, a way that I keep him alive through that. So I just thought to offer those few words this evening. Tomorrow being the anniversary, I hope I'll show this to my mother. I hope my mother approves of what I've said. Actually, Ajahn wrote a little story about the same set of events. Ajahn was at my father's funeral, was years ago, and he gave a talk which was written up in the book Silent Rain, called "Suicide is Not Painless." It was a good title for the talk. It sure isn't painless. But it's another one of these issues, isn't it, in life? It's quite an issue in Norway. There's grants being put into the prevention of suicide in the north of Norway, I just found out. So anything that we can do to bring this one out into the open, I think is good. So I believe there was it the husband of the princess? Not at me, is that right? It was committed suicide, the previous husband of the princess, which kind of brought the fact of suicide into public eye in Norway. Because these are heavy things, heavy event, heavy subject, and yet these things can be overcome, so to speak. And so with the special events around my dad's death, but also the practice, the meditation practice, Tai Chi practice and so on. That kept going through the time after my dad died. A lot of my friends remember me for doing Tai Chi in the room where my father's body was laid out in the coffin. These things keep you going through an event like this. But they also give you a tremendous incentive, I think, that you can realise, there was a competent health professional with a happy meditator, engaged Buddhist, getting it all together with my Tai Chi, and then something like this happens. I realised I was going to have to dig deeper in order to find an answer to this kind of event, or grief that ensues from this kind of event. And the fact that if somebody dies close to you like that, then you see your own death looming. It added a tremendous incentive to go for it in the practice. That was part of the reason that I ordained as a monk a few years later. So I think I'll leave it there.